Is AI going to take over the world? What will our future society look like if we continue on the path we're on? You know, a lot of sci-fi writers have painted a lot of pictures of what the future looks like. Today's guest was a leader in big tech, and he's an author that paints a very interesting picture of what the future looks like. Today's guest is Gary Bengier.
Are you ready to live life to the full? Are you ready to rise up and live a life of honor? Are you ready to boldly step into a life of courage? This is the Manlihood Mancast, and here's your host, Josh Hatcher.
Gentlemen, welcome back to the Manlihood Mancast. I'm your host, Josh Hatcher, and today's guest is a true pioneer in the tech industry. He's a best-selling author. He was eBay's first chief financial officer, and he's worked in several other big tech companies. He's written a futuristic novel that offers insights into the challenges that we could face in the future as our lives become more intertwined and wrapped up in tech and artificial intelligence. So what does that look like? Gary F. Bengier is the guest on today's Manlihood Mancast. But before we get into that, I just want to encourage you guys, if you want to join an elite group of men who want to better themselves, I want you to go to manlihood.com/brotherhood. I'd love to have you as a part of the Arrows and Iron Brotherhood. We've got lots of good stuff on the way there, so please go check it out, sign up for it. I love you guys. Let's get right into the conversation with Gary. Gary, it is great to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and Josh, thank you for inviting me here to the Mancast. This sounds like a lot of fun today.
Yeah, it's a great podcast, man. I say that not just because it's mine, but I get to have conversations with some of the coolest people, including yourself, who was a CFO at eBay, and you're an accomplished sci-fi writer and futurist. So you've got a lot of experience and perspectives that I think would be really interesting to the men that listen.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's been an interesting career, and it continues now. So no too early to stop.
So tell me about your experience in Silicon Valley, kind of how you started your career.
Yeah, sure. So I spent on the order of 30 years in high tech, and I was went to business school, was a management consultant, and then I spent a bunch of time working on all kinds of technologies. And I have to say I was fortunate to actually participate in so many. I was in life sciences for half a dozen years. Computer peripherals, hard drives, that sort of thing, and the chip design, so all the semiconductor industry for several years, 4 years, high-tech windmills, streaming video over the internet, the stuff that we're doing right now, and then eBay. And as you said, I was CFO at eBay from the beginning, and was there as we grew to several thousand folks and selling $100 billion worth of stuff, and grew that stuff and went through the IPO and the secondary, where we raised $1.4 billion, which was a lot of fun. So yes, I had a great time in Silicon Valley, and I was just fortunate to be in so many parts of it, so that I really got a sense of a bunch of the technology, and that was that's some of the basis for me in this next phase with writing a science fiction futuristic book.
Yeah, I can imagine that working in tech, it almost kind of adds some juice, to the work that you're doing. Because, yeah, first of all, I love sci-fi, especially dystopian future stuff, and like that's kind of the perspective I always see the world through. Like, okay, this is how this is going to play out.
Well, my book, which is Unfettered Journey, is is it utopian or is it dystopian? The reader can decide, but what I really tried to do is to provide a hard science view of the future. That is, what is highly likely? And the reason for that is that, quite honestly, I think that too much science fiction is not helpful for us to think about the future. It's, it goes off in crazy tangents. It takes some idea and takes it to its absurd, endpoint, and then some of the science is wrong. So, if you wrote a science fiction book before 2007, you probably didn't include the iPhone, right? And so,
Right.
and so, as a result of that, a lot of science fiction writers, I think, sort of give up, and you got dragons and you've got fantasy. So, and that doesn't help us decide what are the really highly likely things that will be in our future, because then you have to ask yourself the question, well, if we kind of know what's highly likely, we're more likely to solve the real problems that will be out there.
I have been a fan recently of watching some older sci-fi movies and reading some sci-fi stuff and starting to see those weird times when they called something, when they got it right.
Yeah. Ray, was it Ray Bradbury who predicted the geosynchronous satellite, right?
Yeah, that kind of stuff is so crazy, and I love it. Well, another even kind of shorter term example, because it's almost like I think of the Netflix show. Well, I don't know if it was Netflix originally, but that's where I saw it. The Black Mirror show.
Yes.
It like calls out like it's a social commentary, and then you start to see where, maybe where tech or these things kind of break down, and almost like a little bit of a warning. So that's
I agree with you. Black Mirror is sort of very dystopian, pointing out some of the worst things that can happen. And yeah, that's. I think that was an interesting show. But I would again ask, what is most likely, and then let's worry about those problems. So, as an example, uploading brains. Oh, come on, that's just not going to happen. Robots out to kill us. I think that's less likely than the fact that the darn things are going to be annoying. So what is most likely, and that's where I head in this book as the basis behind the book. So,
what do you see as we look forward into the future as some of those things that would be most likely?
Okay, great question, Josh. So, first thing is, I think in this next century, the two most important technologies are bioscience and AI and robotics. That's the first statement. Second thing I'll say is, I think that and I was in bioscience for half a dozen years, okay? And I think that bioscience will phenomenally change our lives in, next century and a half. My book takes place in 2161, 140 years from now. But what I like to say is, so we'll mostly cure most cancers in that time. There's all kinds of diseases we have now that'll just disappear, right? We actually won't notice. The interesting thing about the bioscience is, I think for most of it, we won't notice because, we'll live another 20 years or so, and on average, and some people will be living to 120, right? And I don't think we'll live forever. I don't think we'll figure that out like some of the futurists. I won't name them. I think they're crazy. We're not going to find the secret to immortal life. But I think we'll live a lot longer, and I think we'll live healthy lives. But that's just will be normal. So that's bioscience. And we can talk more about what I think are some of the likely things that will be in our typical life that might sound a little weird today, but they'll just be part of life in terms of bioscience. But the second one, AI and robotics, I think that will be the technology that will most change what it feels like to live on this earth. Because, and here's the argument on that. So have you seen the Boston Dynamics dancing robots, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen the videos. Okay, so everyone's seen that. You've seen I think at the Olympics, there was a robot throwing free throws from the center court and hitting every one of them, right? So it looks like these robots are right there on top of us, and in fact, many of them are. They're building our cars. The Amazon's filling their warehouses with robots that are taking over all these jobs. Elon Musk has the idea that Tesla will be 100% robotic at some point. So yeah, that's progressing. But I think two things. One is, I don't think it will be, 10, 20 years from now. I think this is a long process. It's more akin to the automobile. Henry Ford, early 1900s, invented the car, mass production, but it took like a century for the car to be the car we have today. You had to get the roads, you had to have the legal infrastructure to deal with what happens when people get hurt or killed, and all that took a long time. But now we are, an order of a century later, and we've got the car. So taking those two ideas, I'm saying that I think that robots will be a lot longer, it will take longer to get to there. But I think that it is inevitable that it will get there. And the reason is that the economics will drive it. We've got the Ukraine war going on, right? They're using drones like crazy there. If you're following any of the military strategists that are listening here, we're seeing the first 21st century war, really, and the military is going to pay for these robots. Keep a guy from getting killed, they're going to have a robot out there on the battlefield, and more and more of these jobs will be done by robots. And it's at some point you're going to see them all around us. So I'm on the board of the Santa Fe Institute, and I attended a workshop on AI and with some of the world's experts, and we spent 3 days in Santa Fe talking about the future of AI. And there was one of the presenters who had a presentation talking about jobs being lost, and he had this idea of a topology, hills and mountains, and the idea was like as water rose, that was taking jobs away. That was his analogy. And so the question is, if you can imagine that, as the water rises, what are the first jobs to go, and what are those jobs at the top of those hills and mountains, right? Maybe the top of the mountain is some job like yours, Josh, podcaster. It's hard to imagine a robot doing this. And I like to argue that one of those jobs is roofer. The guy who climbs up on the roof with a bunch of shingles and has to tack them down. It's pretty darn hard to automate that. And so at some point, roofers will be making $300,000-$400,000 a year, and of course the economics will drive it, and they'll basically build a robot that's kind of our size, and at some point we'll have robots walking around.
Right? Well, we do have 3D printers that can print an entire building from foundation to the top now. So maybe it'll just be a matter of rethinking roof.
That could be. It could. Okay, and so in that case, the job goes away without the robot, right?
Right. So the need for roofs goes away.
Yes, right. But I think then it's highly likely, highly likely. You can almost see it because it's an A to Z engineering problem. There's nothing that's unknown in this. It's just working out the details, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then now think about that. What's the end of that? The end of that is when robots build robots, which is already happening. Mm-hmm. When robots are, mining the ores and smelting the metal and building the factories that build the robots. When that happens, when robots build robots, which I'm saying is highly likely, then what happens? So, today we think about labor productivity for economics, right? How much is productivity increasing every year? And it's been increasing since about 1870. It jump-started dramatically. And so, we're talking 2-3% a year, right? That causes this enormous compounding. Well, that's based upon individual people working more efficiently. But what happens when you have 20 robots working for you because they're just made by the robots, right? So suddenly, for the first time in human history, the individual activity of each of us is not tied to the economic output, right? And when that happens, we're going to have a ton of stuff, just a ton of stuff, okay? If you run the models forward, that suggests that by 140 years, we're going to have 10 to 20 times as much stuff per person in the US as we have today, okay? So there'll be a lot of stuff, but there will be no jobs. So think about that. So and what I'm suggesting is that that's a highly likely future. Okay. And so what's really different this time, what's really different is that, it's a completely different economic system.
Right. And I know there's a lot of talk of that right now with the World Economic Forum and other people that are talking about, starting to transform the way that we think of the economy. And to be honest with you, I mean, I'm, diehard, red-blooded capitalist American, so I understand. I mean, I think capitalism as a system isn't a bad thing. I think that's a good
Yes.
thing. I also, do see that because people have the capability of being bad, that system doesn't always work the way it's supposed to work either. So, yeah, there will be a day when there will be some changes made to the way that we view the world. Definitely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, to your point, yeah, as you can see, I'm a capitalist too. The market system does a good job of helping to make things more efficient. So, as an example, the people who fled Castro's Cuba and went to Florida, they are, samples of, hundreds of thousands now. On average, they have 7 times as much stuff as the people they left behind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the capitalist system is pretty efficient. I mean, it's one sort of anecdotal measurement, but so that's good. But as you say, what happens then when we get to this new phase when there are so few jobs that will be quote unquote necessary, right? And who owns the robot factories at that point? So,
Right.
uh,
Right.
yeah.
Because then you start getting into the political side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here I am. I'm with you. I'm a believer in the market system because it makes things more efficient. But I do think we can't have an unmitigated system. And by the way, think about what's happening in the future. Amazon has lots of data on all of what we buy, right? eBay has a lot of data on what we buy and what we wish to buy. And so if you think of all that data itself, in some ways, well, very much can replace what is the mechanism in the capitalist system. You have these old supply and demand curves. If there's not enough stuff out there, the price goes up, and then more manufacturers come in and make more of it, and then the price comes back down, et cetera. So the idea is that price mediates between supply and demand. That's economics 101. But if you have all this data, then you could feed the data into the robot factories, and they could statistically predict what we're going to need and want next, and probably do a better job and more efficiently because you don't have to wait. There's not that lag, and so out comes the stuff that we really want. So you can see a system that's very efficient, which is the great news about market capitalism, but that doesn't need those mechanisms, and so I can see it, and then coupled with that is the fact that all these jobs will go away. So if you have all those jobs going away, honestly, I don't think that we're going to have enough demand for all the poets and writers and musicians to make up for that, and so jobs will be dear. People want a job that's kind of interesting and cool, right?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Well, and again, I mean, so like I said, I'm the contrarian a little bit. So I think of that view, I think of that future, and so we're even having some of that right now. You talk about the corporation able to predict what you want. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have thought something, right? I thought, I need to get a new pair of shoes. I haven't said it out loud. I haven't said it out loud to anybody.
Siri wasn't listening on you, huh?
I get an ad served within, a couple days of me thinking in my head, I need a new pair of shoes. And I know that the reason that ad is served to me is because they're, I bought my shoes off Amazon, and I know that Amazon is tracking how long a pair of shoes should last.
That's right.
Right? I know that I may have said something that, yes, a microphone with AI enabled is listening to that might indicate, that there's some shoes that need to be, there's some predictive algorithms already telling me what. So where my hang up is, and, I know that you are a man who has lived his life in big tech,
Yes.
My hang up is because I'm starting to see big tech starting to dictate and start to control speech on their platform, and to things like that, where I'm starting to wonder, like I know that AI can only do what it's programmed to do, right? Like,
Yes.
So a robot can only build what it's programmed to build. The hope is that people that are in charge of all of that have a good soul.
Yeah, and it's been proven in many cases that we can talk about that doesn't seem to be evident, right?
Right. I saw this is a big hang up for me, because I just lately I've seen so much censorship, right? And I know that it's not technically censorship, because Facebook's platform, for example, Facebook owns the platform, so they have a right to say, we're not going to allow this content to be shared on our platform. Just like my front porch, if somebody comes on my front porch and starts calling my wife something horrible, I have the right to punch him in the nose or tell him to leave, right? That's my front porch. The problem is we don't see Facebook as their front porch. We see it as our free speech public square platform. And I saw somebody the other day shared a picture of a cowboy carrying a baby calf, like he was rescuing the calf, and there was a Bible verse on it. And it had a content warning that it might contain dangerous content. And I know that no person out there flagged it and said, oh, I mean, that was a robot that misread something,
Yes.
So AI is now being used to enforce, I mean, and again, I know it's not technically the freedom of speech, but it is in our minds. AI is being used to enforce free speech and rights.
Yes. Well, yeah, you've got a number of issues there. Let me make 2 points. One is just this summer I went to my Harvard Business School reunion. Okay, and when they do these things, they have like cases, like we sat there and had to answer to. And there's a case that was a certain social media company, and the question was whether they were doing a good job or whether they should be more regulated, because they weren't. And the interesting thing is, this class of Harvard Business School veterans and people with illustrious careers, 90% of the class agreed they should be better regulated because they were doing such a poor job, which is maybe shocking to most audiences to think this place of capitalism would believe that. So that's one point. The second is that I do think that the issue of privacy is a really important question in the future, and that's in my book too. It raises the question of how much control will the government have, and should it have, and how much can we be private? Do we have a right to be forgotten on the internet?
Mm. And that brings up another quick question, which I'll make also quickly, but just like we have to worry about whether the people that are controlling corporations have good souls, we also have to worry about whether the government and the people controlling that have good souls.
Certainly true. So, That's right.
We're kind of at the mercy of that,
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the way it's going, if you've been following the politics in China with Xi, of course, getting another 5-year term in office and looking like he's heading for a lifetime term, and the way he's taken China, that may be something to watch very carefully as how we do not want it to happen in terms of personal rights and privacy and government control.
Well, and that's like when we see Elon Musk, which I know right now, a lot of people almost view him as a hero because he's coming in and telling, he's going to say, okay, well, we're going to make Twitter about free speech again, right? But then he's also talking about how what he really wants to build is this thing called X, which is the universal app that has everything in it.
Yes, right.
Including cars, and all of that. And it just kind of makes me think like, okay, so again, we have the opportunity for that social credit system to be created, that idea that, your entire existence can be manipulated or controlled based off of somebody else's algorithms that they've programmed and told what to do, and their values. So I think that is a challenge.
And that is an important challenge. So to my book, I was trying to point out what are the highly likely future, and then what are the real issues. And
Mhm.
privacy is one that's raised in there. As I said, this issue of what happens when robots do so many different jobs and they're walking around among us. There's the restaurant that has all of the servers are robots, and the stores have robots doing all the work, et cetera, et cetera. You get into a car and it's self-driving. You get on an airplane and it takes off and lands, et cetera. Robots are the flight attendants. And imagine that world in 140 years, or it's going to take a while, but that's the end result that I say is highly likely. And so how do we cross that chasm from today to there? And I think, so that's a really important problem that I think is highly likely, and it's one we need to focus on. So.
Yeah. I think that's why, a guy like me who grew up in the middle of nowhere, very rural. I live on the edge of the Allegheny National Forest, which is millions and millions of acres of just trees. I'm the guy that's like, sometimes I think the best thing that could, and I'm also the guy that has an Alexa in 4 rooms of my house, and I wear a Fitbit. You know what I mean? I love tech. I'm a podcast host, and I love tech. I get it. But sometimes when I think about these things, I'm like, man, the best thing that could happen is if North Korea let off a nuclear bomb in our atmosphere and just EMP'd everything out.
Well, I'm a military strategist aficionado, and I've been following the Ukraine war quite closely. And there was just a thread that says, "Yeah, that's not going to happen. The EMPs don't work that way." So anyway, besides that,
I don't know.
Yeah. I actually grew up in Ohio, in the Ohio Valley, so close to and I hiked some of the Appalachian Trail there. So yeah, I know that. Which there is something about getting away from this tech. So that I think is another interesting theme in my book, Unfettered Journey, for your audience. That is, let me just say that about a third of the book, as you get into it, asks in a concrete sense the question: could you live without any of the technology we have today? What would happen if all the technology was taken away from you? If you were sent out into the desert, into the mountains, and you had to live off the land, you had to grow your own wheat, you had to use your bow to shoot your own deer, right? You had to make a living off the land. Could you do it? And so that was a lot of fun to write and to think about. I got a whole shelf full of survivalist books to figure out people who are really into that now. Could we do that? There's a character in my book that says, this is in the future 2161. He says, people are clueless. No one could do this stuff. They can't survive out there. But some of my characters are forced to try.
I think the good thing, as we're talking about that future, right, that like there's enough people out there that are so enamored with the past. I mean, we have Civil War reenactors and Revolutionary War reenactors who love that history so much that they work hard to preserve it. And because we have all of the books and there are libraries that want to preserve information, I think that some of the and every so many years, what's trending is something that's old. That history comes back again. Like somebody like knitting becomes a trend again. So I think that the day will come when even though those things happen, there will always be the information that we need to be able to learn how to do those things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think fortunately we've got all the information in Wikipedia and YouTube, and we won't lose that. It's copied too many places. That's great. I think an interesting question though is that sort of urge for the past and other times that is always tends to be romanticized. You can be out there on the Scottish Highlands or something, right? But we like our tech, right? And why do we romanticize that? Well, I think part of it is because modern society is so complicated, right? There's so much stuff coming at you all the time. If you allow that to happen, you've got this social media coming at you. You've got so much stuff filling up your time that you don't have time to think. And so we sort of yearn for that time to have that peace of mind, and we romanticize that. And I think the reality is that if you were forced to do that, then you'd say, "Geez, I wish I had some of my tech back." so, so, so the world is complicated. It's complex. It's a complex nonlinear system. That's what Santa Fe Institute teaches. And and the reality is that we like that the world that comes out of it because it's easier. But we have to figure out how we find some headspace in all of this to keep not only keep our sanity, but to be real men, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think, that's important. I think that, as men, there's a degree of, like if we all think about our priorities in the world, right? Like our family should be one of the very first things, or our faith, or things that are inherently very, 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 very old, that don't need much tech to exist, and, friendship, brotherhood, strength,
Yes.
those are the things that if we really stop and think about our priorities, those are the things that are the most important. And I think that with or without tech, those things remain most important. And in the times when people forget those, which I think happens a lot, it tends to cycle back around again,
Yeah. Well, I think this audience would particularly enjoy one of my characters named Eloy, who's one of those guys who can get out there and survive. And so that's not too much of a spoiler. He's one of the characters in that part of the book that deals with can you live out with just off of your own wits and living off the land. The book is focuses on two protagonists, Joe, who's actually an AI scientist. He's his job is to try to figure out how to make AIs conscious, and he doesn't really think that's going to ever happen. So he's kind of stuck. And then he comes in contact with another character, and she is very much a fighter. Anyway, stuff happens to those two characters, and I think this character Joe, you're in his head. You're asking, well, what do I do next, and who am I, and why am I here, and what's my purpose in life, and how do I find meaning? Okay, all good questions, and so that's a big part of the book.
Do you, because you bring that up and it's in your book, obviously, I think that you've got thoughts on this. Do you think that pursuit of meaning and purpose changes in the face of technology advancing, or do you think that it stays the same?
I think it's going to get harder for this next century and a half or so, because we spend so much of our life thinking about the way we find purpose in our jobs and those kinds of things. And so what happens when you don't have that anymore, right? So that's going to be a challenge in this next century of a challenge of finding purpose. Okay, I worked summers in the steel mill to put myself through college, right? You get up and you've got a manly job like that. You're out there on the blast furnace, and you've done a good day's work, and you feel satisfaction in that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're most of my career, when you're in tech and you're working 80-hour weeks on another startup, you're finding a lot of purpose in what you're doing. Well, what happens when so many of those jobs go away, right?
Yeah.
In my book, for example, there's a character, and she is managing a space station orbiting the moon. And the purpose of that is to build these probes that are going out to try to find exoplanets, right? And she's got 1,000 robots up there working on this project. And there's people, but they're not a whole lot of them. They're a couple hundred. And that's a cool job, right? We'd all like to have that job. But what happens if you don't have very many of those jobs, right? Well, in this future, there's a law that says you can't work more than 12 hours a week because otherwise there'd be even fewer jobs. So now imagine that kind of future where, having a job is kind of a privilege. Well, something like that is, I think, more likely than not. And that's different. Almost 100 years ago, John Maynard Keynes, beginning of the 1900s and through the 1930s, he was an economist, and he actually wrote a paper about something to my grandchildren or something. And essentially, the part of the essence of it, he was predicting that there's going to be a lot of stuff and the world will change. And by this time, we would be working very few hours, right? Well, he had it off by maybe a century or more, because I think we're working more hours than we were before. It certainly hasn't seemed to let up. But I actually think that finally, this is going to be true when these robots come along. And that's going to happen. So, yeah, it'll be a different world.
Yeah. It's funny because as you're asking that question and you're talking about the future, right? I'm thinking about the times that I've lost a job,
Yeah,
laid off. And I'm like, that is one of those questions that a man digs into is, why do I exist? What is my purpose? And, and I guess I try to define purpose as something maybe deeper than what you do. I think, we hang our hat on our job, hang the hat like on that hook on the wall, and it's the wrong hook.
right.
We exist for more than that,
Yeah, and so how do we find that as men and as human beings? How do we find that real purpose? Well, it's a broader issue, and I think we will have more time to think about that in the future when we will have a lot of these basic needs, or food, shelter, and all that sort of thing taken care of.
Yeah, it's crazy because you keep talking about all the robots that'll be doing all these things, and I keep thinking, man, like, on a smaller scale, we have so many of them now. Like, you can plant a garden in your backyard, and for a couple $1,000, you've got this robot that'll weed. It'll plant, weed, water, take care of it, nurture the whole time, and you never have to touch it. It'll even pick the fruit and send your phone a notification that your tomato is ready.
Yeah. Well, and we think about the progress on this. I'm reading a book now called "How the World Really Works," and it had some interesting statistics. It said if you're back in about 1800 and you look at what it took to farm wheat, and to have 2 pounds of wheat a kilogram, I think, it took like several hours of work per kilogram. Okay, and today with our mechanized farming, if you look at the labor input, it takes about 2 seconds of labor input to produce that. Okay, so we have this enormous mechanization and automation. If anyone's watched the TV show, I don't know if it's still on, called "How Things Work," something like that. It's it's sort of, how do you make ping pong balls? How do you make basketballs? How do you make guitars, etc.? And there's lots of stuff with factories, and if you watch 100 of those, you'll suddenly go, wait a minute, this is order of 2000, the last 20 years or so. You'll say, wait a minute, they just described this process where there were 20 people on this production line, and then what they did is they replaced 5 of them with machines, and then they got machine and a guy and machine and a guy, and then they're doing more and more replacement, and you realize that that's been going on for a long time, and all this automation has removed a ton of jobs, which has fundamentally changed the working class, right? It's already happening. And in places like, for example, where I came from, the Ohio Valley, part of the Rust Belt, that had a dramatic change on the way life was lived. When I was working my way through college and working in a steel mill, there were 760,000 members of the United Steelworkers. And a decade later, there were 70,000. So I don't know how many there are today, but I don't think it's a whole lot more, probably fewer. So these jobs went away, and the point is that there are going to be more of that going away over time, and so we'll have a lot of stuff, but we won't have very many jobs, and then so the world really will be fundamentally different in a century and a half. So that's our biggest challenge this century.
Yeah, I think that's worth thinking about, man. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about that bioscience, that life science stuff. What do you think will change there in medical science that'll make things different?
Yeah, so I first was in bioscience back in 1983, and the company I worked for was involved in the separations chemistry that was actually used to sequence the human genome. Electrophoresis and chromatography are two of the big technologies. And at that time, there was Carey Mullis invented the technique called PCR, polymerase chain reaction, at a company called Cetus, across the bay here in San Francisco, and that revolutionized the field. Okay, now it's been about a decade ago that two folks came up with a technique called CRISPR-Cas9, and CRISPR, I think, and I think most people agree, is the most important technology in bioscience ever, even more important than PCR. And that is fundamentally changing everything. So for example, back before PCR, before CRISPR-Cas9, if you were a bioscientist and you're working on, say, Parkinson's disease, you might say there's 4 or 5 different genetic mutations that might be a cause of it. And so you want to start investigating if that's true. So you take one of them, and then you would take a mouse and you would figure out how to genetically engineer the mouse to knock that thing out to test it. And it would take you a year to make the mouse, okay? And then you would start doing your tests. After CRISPR-Cas9, what you do is you say, I got 5 of them. You send away an order to an organization at Harvard, and they send you back in 2 weeks 5 mice with all of those things in them, and you can test them simultaneously. Okay, so that's just an example to say we have dramatically sped up our ability to use the science to produce new drugs and new cures, and that's just going to revolutionize everything. So I think that what that really means, and most people don't quite understand this, is that we'll have a whole bunch of new drugs coming out and new treatments. So what does that look like in the future? Well, in my book, as an example, there's a device called a MedFlow. It's inserted. It's in 2161. It's a long time in the future, but it's inserted on your hip, and it basically automatically monitors your health, and it micro doses various kinds of chemicals and medications to prolong your life, to check on things. That's how you get your caffeine. you dial it up for the right amount of coffee you want, and all that sort of thing. So, we'll have a few of these kind of devices, which most of our audience might suddenly think that sounds really weird. Got this device embedded, but that will be pretty normal, I think, for developed countries.
Well, I don't even know if that sounds that weird. I've got a friend who's got an eStim, and it charges with that charging where you don't have to plug it in. You put it on, magnetically charges. I've got another friend who's got an insulin pump installed.
Yep.
I don't think the pump is on the inside, but it goes to the inside. I mean, it's not that unrealistic to think about that. But I think about this, right? So right now I've got some friends who are older in nursing homes, and they've lived past their expiration date. And, every time something goes wrong, the family rushes the doctors in and they do some kind of treatment or some kind of surgery. And this guy's 85 years old. He's ready to go,
Right.
And we keep him alive. And it's not because he wants to stay alive. It's because his family wants him to be alive. He's ready to go, And I've thought a lot about that for myself. My dad had cancer, and I remember, they declared that he was cancer-free, and then later it came back and he needed a surgery, and he was so tired after going through all that. I remember he told me, I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this. I don't know if I want to. And I told him, we have to, Dad. You have to. We need you. And, he was young. He was 67, I think.
Yeah, that is young. Yep.
It is young, yeah. But looking back, knowing that, the decision to have the surgery is what ended up taking his life. If he hadn't had the surgery, he would have died, but he would have died probably quicker. You know what I mean? But he had the surgery and he ended up dying anyway. And it was not quicker and it was painful. And so I've kind of already decided, okay, if I'm under a certain age, I'll go through chemo and all of that. But if I'm over a certain age, and I know where my limit is, I've lived a good life. Just let me go.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I don't think we'll live forever. But I do think we're going to be able to, extend healthy life. I think fairly significantly. Maybe 10,
Reducing
maybe 20 years.
So that it's not as we're not going to be a bunch of crippled old people wanting to die at 80 years old.
Well, I hope not. No,
Yes.
but we all have an expiration date, and I don't think that's going to change. There are some immortal jellyfish. They basically live forever, right? And
Or
there's
at least
experiments.
no, right?
Well, there's some people experimenting on those, and there's a few that hope that we can figure out some code and crack it. But I don't think that's going to happen. The whole process of senescence is so complex. And it's evolutionary, right? Our evolutionary history was working to get us to the point of reproduction, and then after we got past age 30 or 40, forget about it. It didn't care anymore. So we're not optimized beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to a lady at work today about 40. 40 stuff started hurting, and I think we all kind of realized, 40 is when stuff started hurting, man.
Well, okay, but the manly stuff, you got to work at it. I ran a 5K this morning and one yesterday. I run a 5K in the morning. It's just got to get out there and do it. Take the pain.
Yep. And pain becomes your friend, I guess. That's
right. Yeah, you got to keep moving. So for everyone, just keep on doing that. Go climb mountains.
There you go. Oh, Gary, I love talking about the future with you because I think you've got a pretty cool vision of it, and you can see, it's based off your experience, based off of science, based off of, I think that's pretty neat. So, the name of your book again, what was it?
The book is Unfettered Journey, and it is, as I said, it's a futuristic adventure and love story, and you can find it in audio, and paperback, hardbound, wherever you buy books. It's all over the place. It's now in 8 languages, and it has won 11 book awards. So I'm very pleased with that.
Wow.
It's doing quite well.
Job.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
We'll make sure that we link it in the show notes so our guys can check it out. I think that's pretty cool. Gary, I like to ask all my guests some questions, and so I'm really interested to see your answers to this because I think you'll have some good perspective. What do you think it takes to be a man?
I think it takes being a man of his word. Okay. I know one of the tags for this podcast is a life of honor. And I think when you can look another guy in the eye and you know that you can trust him, that whatever he says is what he's going to do, that's what really makes a man. And that those that aren't like that are less likely to look you back in the eye.
Mm. Yeah, I wish we had 2 words. I mean, we do. We could call one a male and the other one a man, maybe.
Yes.
Something to delineate, between that guy that has honor and then the guy that doesn't.
That's right.
We have a guy and we have a man.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer.
That's what I believe. That's the way you have to live your life, I think. So.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think we might need more guys like that working in tech.
Well, that will maybe eliminate some of those dystopian things that we talked about, right?
People who are operating with a set of principles and codes and values that actually put each other first rather than profit and greed and all of that.
Yeah, and respect for each other.
Yeah.
I mentioned a couple of times about military strategy. I'm a hobbyist on that. I've visited most of the Civil War battlefields. Abraham Lincoln was one of my heroes. Abe Lincoln was one of those guys that he didn't care who he met. He treated them with respect and as an equal, and he was so well known for that. And I think that's a trait to emulate. So, yeah.
I wish we had more Abe Lincolns out there, to be honest with you.
Yes.
One of my favorite Abe Lincoln stories is he would go up to, when he'd visit the military camps, he would go challenge the soldiers, and he'd pick up an axe like at the end of the handle and hold it out straight in front of him, so the axe is up in the air as long. And you try to do that, you can't do it for very long. You can't hold it. You're strong. And I mean, he grew up using that axe to split rails. And so he's doing that, and he would challenge the soldiers, and he'd beat them every time. Which is cool.
Well, I have a certain respect for an axe too, as anyone who reads my book will tell, and that goes back to a childhood memory. So when I was a kid, we moved into a new house that had an acre of land around it, and family didn't have enough money to do any landscaping. We had to do it ourselves, and it had all these trees on it. So my dad got out there and cut them all down, but we had all these stumps that are foot tall, and so it was my job to get out there and chop the stumps out. So I had a double bitted axe, and I was 6. That's probably child abuse today, but I got really good. I got really good at using that axe to chop out those stumps.
I don't know if that's child abuse or if that was character building. That's why you are a man who respects honor, I think, because
that's right.
You know the value of hard work.
My mother thought it was building character, and she's probably right. Yeah.
I love it. That's a great story.
And acre trees is a lot of stumps too.
I had a similar experience growing up. I grew up on the Allegheny River, right in the backyard, like about 20 miles from the source, and there was a swimming hole in the back, and these kids would come down there and party and wreck it. So my dad decided to clear the land back there, and we were always out there just like hauling brush and clearing little trees, and it wasn't as stumpy probably as that. There were small trees, but it was a lot of work. And now my mom's got this beautiful yard now, so
that's great.
You see the Allegheny River from the back window. So
that's great.
So my next question for you is, if you could talk to the 10-year-old version of Gary, so this is at least a few years into you chopping down trees, what would you tell 10-year-old Gary?
I think I would tell 10-year-old Gary, learn how to tack. If anyone who's a sailor, you have to, if you're heading upwind, you have to tack. That's because it's just going to blow you back. So you're going to have to tack left and, slowly work your way up and then tack right. And depending on whether the wind is right in the direction that you're trying to go, you're just going to have to tack, and it takes a lot of work. And there is a lot of life that is like that, where you're fighting something and you're trying to get to where you want to go, and everything is moving against you. And so you're just going to have to work at it. And so expect that life involves a lot of tacking. But if you work at it, you're going to get to where you're going, where you want to go.
Consistency.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good advice for 40-something-year-old Josh here. So, because I could think of many times, man, you start to run into that obstacle or that thing that's pushing against you in the opposite direction. You're like, okay, I've had enough of this. Let me try something different.
Yeah. Well, and I think some people think that they hear about careers and they think, wow, this is wonderful. That guy's got it great and that sort of thing. And what you don't see is it's like a duck. Maybe it looks placid on the surface, but paddling like hell underwater. And so, yeah, that's a lot of life. And that's to back to your theme, the manliness, I think it's not giving up. My character in the book, Joe, says, never resign, never resign.
I love it. And what is your best advice? And you may have already given it, but what is your best advice for the men that are listening today?
Yeah. Well, this is kind of related, I think. It's that, and this is what I learned from my career, and this is based upon, working in a lot of startups, small companies, and, you're there working 80-hour weeks, and everything seems to be going okay in your area, but the engineering screwed up and that didn't work. And then you go to another company, you're working 8-hour weeks, and everything's finally getting under control, and then the marketing screws up and it doesn't work. So my advice is, whatever you're doing, take lots of at-bats. That's the secret to life. Keep on swinging. You're going to pop a few out, and you're going to get some ground outs and all that sort of thing. But you keep on swinging, get lots of at bats. Who knows what will happen?
Yeah, that's how you get a higher batting average, is by these to hit, right?
Or that one hit. All you need is that one home run, right?
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate it very much. What's the best way if our guys want to connect with you? Obviously, we've talked about your book, and I know we'll link that in the show notes, but what's the best way for guys to follow you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. My author website is GaryFBengier.com. That's Bengier, GaryFBengier.com. And you can send me a note at Gary@GaryFBengier.com. So check out my website. Please buy the book. It's I think it is a interesting speculation on philosophy and the future and all the topics we just talked about, Josh. So thank you for inviting me to share this with your audience.
Definitely. I love, too, that sci-fi is a cool way to have that conversation, but in the context of of a really cool fiction story, too. So that's a neat way to be able to present all that, man. So it's good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, appreciate it, Josh. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being on the show, man. When the world all comes crashing down, I do think that there are some skills that each of us need to know and need to have. Can you build a fire? Can you find your own food? And it's hard to picture what that might look like. And I think Gary has a great perspective. So Gary, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I hope that the rest of us can think about and prepare for the future. And, I think the first thing we need to think about is, how do I take care of my family? How do I take care of my neighbors? How do I better myself so that I'm prepared for anything that might happen? So I guess that's my encouragement for you guys today. Listen, I really appreciate you guys checking in with us and listening to the Manlihood Mancast. And if you're not a part of our private Facebook group, I want you to go to the Manlihood Man Cave on Facebook and join the group. We'd love to have you. Introduce yourself. All right, guys, I love you. I care about you, and I'll see you next time.
If you want to be a better man, check out our website, manlihood.com, for blogs, videos, and more from our Manlihood team. And you can also join our private Facebook group, Manlihood Man Cave, where you can meet up with a band of brothers who will challenge you and help you on your journey of manhood. This episode is produced by Hatcher Media for manlihood.com. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to the show. Tune in again for more of the Manlihood Mancast.